What if your thoughts aren't entirely yours? What if the dreams you have, the memories you carry, even the instincts that guide you are echoes from something far older than your mind? Modern physics, through a framework known as M-theory, suggests that our universe may be more than just the 3 dimensions we see and the time we move through. It proposes that reality extends into 11 dimensions, unseen layers of space and possibility that go far beyond what we can touch or measure. Most of us live our lives grounded in the physical world, cause and effect, memory and experience. But what if those everyday moments are quietly shaped by a deeper architecture? In today's video, we'll explore a mind-bending idea, that the 11th dimension may act like a living field of cosmic memory, a kind of universal data cloud where every thought, emotion, and life form is subtly connected, not metaphorically, literally. By the end of this journey, you may never look at your own mind or your memories the same way again. To understand how your memories, or even your thoughts, might not be entirely yours, we first need to take a step beyond what we can see and touch. This is where theoretical physics opens the door to something far stranger and far more expansive. At the core of this idea is string theory, one of the most ambitious attempts in modern science to explain the fabric of reality. According to string theory, everything in the universe, from atoms to galaxies, is made up of tiny vibrating strings of energy. These strings are so small that we can't observe them directly, but their vibrations determine the fundamental particles and forces that shape our world. Now here's where things get really interesting. String theory on its own couldn't quite unify all the forces of nature, not until it was expanded into M-theory. This framework proposed something bold, that reality isn't just made up of 3 spatial dimensions and 1 of time, but rather 11 total dimensions. That means 7 additional dimensions exist beyond what we can physically perceive. Most of these higher dimensions, scientists say, are compactified, curled up so tightly that we don't experience them directly. But what if these invisible dimensions aren't just theoretical oddities? What if they serve a purpose, one we haven't fully understood? Some physicists and philosophers alike suggest that these higher dimensions might act as the blueprints of reality. Think of the 3 dimensions you know as the finished painting, and the higher dimensions as the unseen sketch underneath. They don't just influence our world, they shape it from behind the scenes. Now imagine the 11th dimension not just as a space of geometry, but as a kind of living archive, a massive field of encoded information not bound by time or space. In this field, everything that has ever happened, every potential future, and every layer of consciousness might be stored. It's here that physics begins to brush up against metaphysics. Because if this 11th dimensional field really exists, if it holds data not limited to your individual brain or biology, then it might explain why certain memories, thoughts, or flashes of inspiration seem to come from nowhere. It might mean that our minds are not the sole creators of our experience, but rather receivers, like radios picking up signals from a deeper cosmic broadcast. To visualize this, picture a massive server, like the kind that holds the Internet's data. Now imagine your consciousness tapping into that server through a high-speed wireless connection. You think you're recalling something from your own life, but what if you're actually accessing a record stored far beyond your physical brain? This isn't science fiction. Even in mainstream neuroscience, researchers are beginning to question whether memory is strictly localized in the brain. Cases of individuals with severely damaged or even missing parts of their brain who still function normally have challenged the traditional view. Some scientists now propose that memory might not be stored inside the brain the way files are stored on a hard drive, but could be non-local, much like a cloud-based system. And if memory is non-local, then what is it tapping into? Here's where the 11th dimension becomes more than abstract math. In this expanded model of reality, higher dimensions aren't just passive, they are interactive. They may contain the full spectrum of potential forms, thoughts, histories, and futures. And the 11th dimension, being the highest known in M-theory, might be the master layer, the universal source code, where everything is connected. When mystics speak of universal consciousness, or when people describe mystical experiences of feeling one with everything, they may unknowingly be describing a brush with this field. The idea is radical, yes, but not entirely unscientific. In fact, physicist Michio Kaku has speculated that a unified theory of everything could depend on fully understanding how these higher dimensions operate. And once we do, it may revolutionize not only physics, but our understanding of mind, memory, and even identity. Now, if the 11th dimension acts like a cosmic data field, then we need to rethink how memory truly works, not just biologically, but multidimensionally. For most of modern science, memory has been understood as a function of the brain. Neurons fire, synapses connect, and over time, those patterns form what we call experience. But what if that's not the whole story? What if your brain isn't the container of memory, but more like a receiver, an antenna tuned into something greater? This idea isn't new. The great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung once proposed something he called the collective unconscious, a vast shared reservoir of memory, symbols, and knowledge inherited by all humans. Jung noticed that people from vastly different cultures and backgrounds would often report similar dreams, myths, and spiritual experiences. To him, this wasn't coincidence. It pointed to something universal, something that existed beyond individual memory. Now imagine the collective unconscious not just as a metaphor or a mythic idea, but as a real energetic structure embedded within the higher dimensions of reality, a kind of memory architecture suspended across time and space. What Jung described could be the psychological mirror of something encoded in the 11th dimension, a place where human history, emotion, and symbolic patterns are stored like entries in an infinite database. There's even evidence in biology that memory is more than just neural wiring. Think of epigenetics, the study of how environmental experiences, especially trauma, can alter gene expression and be passed down through generations. Scientists have found that the descendants of Holocaust survivors, for example, may carry biochemical markers of their ancestors' suffering. Mice conditioned to fear a certain smell pass that fear on to their offspring, even if those offspring were never exposed to it directly. This is called epigenetic memory. But what if this biological inheritance is just one layer? What if it's the physical expression of a much deeper memory field that spans dimensions? Could ancestral trauma, wisdom, and even long-lost instincts be stored not just in your DNA, but in an invisible, dimensional archive that your body and brain are simply tapping into? In many ancient spiritual systems, there's a concept that aligns surprisingly well with this idea: the Akashic records. In Hindu and theosophical traditions, the Akashic records are said to be a non-physical plane where every soul's journey, past, present, and future, is recorded. It is described as a vast energetic library that anyone can access through deep meditation, dreams, or heightened states of consciousness. Sound familiar? The Akashic records could very well be the metaphysical language for what modern theorists are now exploring through M-theory and dimensional physics. In this view, memory isn't just something that happens to you. It's something that is stored in you, around you, and perhaps through you. Your consciousness becomes the interface, the browser, for navigating a much larger web of encoded experience. This could explain why some people report sudden knowledge of things they've never studied, why a child might play a musical instrument flawlessly with no formal training, or why others feel unshakable connections to places they've never been or languages they've never learned. In all these cases, something seems to be coming through the person, not from them. So how does this change the way we understand memory? It expands it. Radically. Memory is no longer just a neurological process. It becomes a multi-layered system with biological, psychological, and dimensional components. And your brain isn't a vault. It's a vessel, tuned into a broader signal that's constantly streaming from higher dimensions. This makes memory less about the past and more about positioning, like tuning into a radio station. Shift your awareness, deepen your consciousness, or enter altered states, and you might access entirely new frequencies of memory, including those that were never technically yours. That feeling of, I don't know how I know this, may not be fantasy or coincidence. It may be contact with something vast, ancient, and beautifully organized across dimensions. Now, let's take this up a notch. Have you ever walked into a room you've never seen before and felt an eerie sense of familiarity, like you've been there in another time, another life, or perhaps another version of reality? That strange moment is called déjà vu. And while it's often dismissed as a brain glitch or a delayed neural signal, it may in fact be one of the most compelling signs that memory is not confined to this dimension. Déjà vu literally means already seen, and for centuries it has fascinated philosophers, mystics, and scientists alike. But what if it's not just about seeing a place again? What if it's about remembering something from a place or a dimension that isn't usually accessible to conscious awareness? If the 11th dimension is indeed a field of encoded memory, then déjà vu could be a moment when the boundaries between your current timeline and another stored version overlap. Like two radio stations bleeding into each other, you get a brief, distorted glimpse into another possibility. A memory that isn't necessarily from this life, but still belongs to you, in a broader, multidimensional sense. These slips between dimensions don't only show up as déjà vu. Sometimes they come as dreams so vivid they leave an emotional imprint that lingers for days, or spontaneous thoughts and images that seem to drop into your mind, carrying information you can't trace to anything you've learned or seen. Many people have described experiencing this in moments of silence, crisis, or deep meditation, as if something unlocks and lets an unfamiliar yet strangely intimate memory surface. These instances are often chalked up to coincidence or hidden exposure. But when the explanations run dry, one question remains: where is that thought coming from? Across many cultures, especially in indigenous and Eastern traditions, the idea of ancestral memory has long been accepted. It's believed that the experiences of your forebears, their fears, strengths, and even specific memories, live on in you, shaping your instincts and responses. But here too we can ask, is this memory passed only through DNA? Or is there a field, perhaps rooted in the 11th dimension, where these collective echoes reside, ready to be accessed? This brings us to dreams, not the random, chaotic kind, but the ones that feel orchestrated, structured, like they're showing you something, not from the unconscious, but from a place beyond time. Some people report having dreams of people they've never met, places they've never been, or detailed experiences from distant eras. Often, these dreams carry a profound emotional weight, as though something deep inside recognizes what the conscious mind does not. Could these dreams be brief excursions into the memory field of the 11th dimension? Not fantasies, but fragments, bleeding through from one layer of reality to another? Again, the standard explanation is coincidence. But if time is not linear in the higher dimensions, then perhaps these dreams aren't predictions. They are downloads. Data retrieved from a dimension where all events, past and future, already exist in encoded form. Intuition works in a similar way. That gut feeling about someone you just met, the unexplainable sense to take a different route, or the sudden idea that changes the course of your life. These too might be micro-interactions with a dimensional intelligence. You're not guessing. You're remembering something your conscious mind hasn't accessed yet. These phenomena, déjà vu, ancestral memory, spontaneous knowledge, dreams, intuition, all suggest that we are not isolated consciousnesses, floating alone. Rather, we're intricately connected to a wider field of awareness, one that stores more than our personal past. It may contain the memory of our species, our planet, and perhaps realities we've only brushed against in the margins of our sleep and silence. What we call mystery might just be memory viewed from the wrong angle. At this point, we must accept that something profound is happening to humanity. A slow but unmistakable shift in how we experience ourselves, our thoughts, and our relationship with reality. For many, it starts quietly, a strange dream that feels more real than waking life. An emotional reaction to something unexplainable, a sudden realization that who we are might stretch far beyond our bodies or biographies. This awakening isn't a trend or a passing phase. It may be the early stage of a much deeper evolution, one in which we begin accessing more of the data stored in dimensions we were never taught to believe were real. In the model of M-theory, the 11th dimension contains not just the architecture of space and time, but also the possibilities that haven't yet unfolded, a kind of master code for existence itself. If each of us is plugged into this code, even unconsciously, then perhaps spiritual awakening is not about learning something new. It's about remembering what was always there. Many spiritual traditions have spoken of a higher self, a version of you that exists beyond ego, beyond the illusion of separation. This higher self isn't a fantasy or a metaphysical placeholder. It may be the aspect of your consciousness that is already aware of its multidimensional nature, the part of you that remembers lifetimes, sees across timelines, and understands your life as one thread in a much larger tapestry. The more we wake up to this, the more we begin to feel the tug of that deeper intelligence. It whispers in dreams. It nudges us in moments of silence. It speaks not in language, but in knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't come from books or teachers, but wells up from within, as if from a hidden reservoir of ancient truth. This shift is also reflected in the collective. People around the world are beginning to sense that consciousness itself may be more foundational than matter. That mind doesn't emerge from the brain, but that the brain is a temporary tool used by a consciousness that already exists. This isn't just spiritual language anymore. It's a view now gaining ground among some physicists and neuroscientists alike. As this shift deepens, we find ourselves drawn toward ideas that once seemed esoteric or fringe. Synchronicity, telepathy, past life recall, energy healing, and the notion that all life is connected at a level science has only begun to measure. But through the lens of the 11th dimension, these aren't anomalies. They're features. As we evolve, we're not gaining powers. We're restoring access to what has always been possible within the full spectrum of consciousness. It also brings us face to face with non-duality, the idea that there is no true separation between self and other, subject and object, observer and observed. In the 11th dimension, where time collapses and space folds into itself, these distinctions lose meaning. You aren't a drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in a drop. Not a separate mind, but an expression of the field itself, a temporary pattern in a sea of infinite awareness. This doesn't mean you're not real. It means you are more real than you've been told. You are the product of billions of years of evolution, yes, but also the result of countless dimensional interactions, ancestral echoes, and stored wisdom that spans far beyond Earth's surface. To awaken, then, is to come online, to remember not just who you are, but what you are part of. It's not about becoming enlightened in some distant future. It's about recognizing that the light was always there, just waiting to be uncovered. And once that awareness begins to settle in, the world doesn't change. You do. What once looked random now appears intentional. What once felt separate now feels interconnected. What once seemed like a whisper from nowhere begins to sound like a message, not just from the stars, but from the dimension where everything is remembered. Look, this isn't about certainty. It's about possibility and the willingness to look beyond the surface of what we call reality. The 11th dimension may never be fully mapped by science. It may always remain, at least partially, in the realm of the unseen. But that doesn't make it any less real. After all, radio waves existed long before we built radios. The unseen has always been the foundation of the seen. So what if those strange moments, when time bends, when intuition flares, when a dream leaves you shaken, are not accidents, but invitations? Invitations to remember something deeper, something ancient, something that doesn't begin or end with your body, your birth, or even this lifetime. Maybe you're not just a mind with memories. Maybe you're a portal, a living interface between dimensions. A receiver of messages carried not through language, but through vibration, through resonance, through remembrance. Let this idea live in your imagination, not as dogma, not as doctrine, but as a door you can walk through whenever you find yourself wondering, why do I know this? Why does this feel familiar? Why does this moment feel remembered? There may never be final proof, but there can be moments of clarity, flashes of recognition that remind you, you are not alone, and you never have been. So reflect on this. What if every time you awaken, you're simply remembering what you already knew, across all dimensions? And what if deep down, you've always known that to be true?